Great to have everybody here, and really excited to have the two folks who we have with us, who Ed just introduced. Rico and Maiko are people who I've known for a little while, and some people will know that I have been critical of some folks who try to facilitate conversations with other people with whom they are friends. So I'm going to do the best I can to overcome my criticism of other people who try to do this, possibly with your help, or you will help to sabotage me one way or the other, which will be great. Our topic is, as Ed was describing, I'm a total geek, and hopefully some people are geeks for what is a city as an organism? Like, how does a city develop? What is the culture and nature of these communities that we all belong to and that we gravitate to in cities? And both of you have incredible experience with different parts of these questions, and thinking deeply about what is it that makes a community healthier, more stable, a great place for young people, older people. And so we're going to try to talk about that, because you can't be in Seattle, you can't be in a major city right now and not be surrounded by questions of what the heck is happening around us. Last month we had conversations with Seattle Police Department Chief Diaz, and we had some conversations about gun violence. We had questions about at-risk, vulnerable populations in our city, whether that's young people or other folks. We've had conversations about the justice system. We've had conversations about healthcare. And in our cities, like, we can't not talk about affordability right now. We can't not talk about what is the economic mix that is either helpful to people building a life for themselves and their families and a future, and what's the economic mix that isn't conducive to that. We are talking about what makes safe neighborhoods. The thing that I, of course, geeked out about, that Rico, you're most deeply involved with, is the One Seattle plan. I'm going to use Mayor Harrell's branding for it, and I think we will all get brownie points for that.
It is our branding.
It is our branding. It is all of our branding. I'm going to start off with a couple of general questions before we get to the One Seattle plan, and before we get into, like, what does affordability actually mean? What are we arguing about when we talk about housing affordability? Rico, how long have you been in Seattle? How did you get to Seattle?
So I'm a born and raised Seattleite. I was born at a children's hospital. I grew up in the CD, well, at least my early years, and then moved to the east side for junior high and high school. But worked as a practicing architect for 27 years and joined the city 2 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Terse for you. That was pretty good. Wow. I know.
I'm a new person.
We can talk about that later if we have time. That'd be great. Maiko, how long in Seattle? How did you get here?
I've been in Seattle consistently since 1994, however many years that is. I got to Seattle to run away from my mother. I was born in Japan, raised in Hawaii. I did not want to go to school anywhere near my mother, because then she would just show up. So I went to school in Tacoma, which had a strong had a strong tie for people from the island of Oahu there. It was helpful that the person that came to my high school said, you don't have to worry about your SAT English scores, because we know they will be bad. And so it's a place that I kept coming back to, because my English is not great, right? And I didn't grow up speaking English either. So didn't grow up speaking English, grew up in Hawaii, that all equals bad SATs. So I just kept coming back here a couple of times, and then I ended up marrying a fourth generation Chinese American Seattleite. Just couldn't get away.
So you both, in ways that I don't think we anticipated when we invited you both to be here, we get a transplant into this region, and we get a native-born Seattleite in this region.
And my father was from Puerto Rico, and my mother and father met in Tacoma, where he was on the Army base, and she lived and worked there. So we have that tie too.
City of your destiny, then.
Yes.
Yeah, city of destiny.
Michael, what's your job at the City of Seattle? What is your job at the City of Seattle? But what do you actually do?
My official title is the Director of the Office of Housing for the City of Seattle. What do? I try to balance very technical issues around where we make our investments and to whom and for what in the area of housing, and looking at buildings that we've owned for 30 or 40 years and figure out, why did we invest in those, and what are we doing now with all the changing issues around, unreinforced masonry, electrification, I think is the word. I'm getting stuck on that. And just, after 30 years of owning a property, like, things start to sag, things get a little, things have changed a lot. So how do you reinvest in that? And then just really thinking, sometimes we get lost in those technical details and all this, but I think with a bigger picture frame for how do we make Seattle, how do we allow affordability for people across the range of people who want to live here, and providing opportunities for people to live throughout the city of Seattle, not just in certain neighborhoods, right? So thinking about it from that perspective as well. It's the range of affordable housing and opportunity to be close to places that might be important to you personally.
I love that you took us right into unreinforced masonry, which will be a whole nother show, because I love that topic. And it takes us, yeah, it is.
Sorry.
It was good. But you also gave us a really good platform into other things we're going to talk about. Before we get there, Rico, tell us your job again. Tell us what you actually do.
So I'm the...
Maiko and I both have ideas about what you actually do, but we'll let you use your words
I want
for
to
it.
know what that answer is.
We think you stare at your phone and walk around in circles talking.
Well, that happens. That does happen.
That does happen.
So I am the acting director for the Office of Planning and Community Development. We have 4 divisions. So we have community planning, long-range planning, land use policy, and then we put out around $20 million a year in equitable development initiative dollars, which is to fund community-based, community-led projects, largely like BIPOC, community-focused work, which we're very proud of. I think that, I'm being an architect, what I'm very interested in is taking what are obscure land use policy language, things that generally put people to sleep, and help translate those big ideas into implementation. Like, how does the policy wonky talk that is our daily life as administrators, how does that translate into actually positive impact for community and real people and families? Some of that's job related, some of that's housing related. The biggest thing that we have on our plate right now is looking at land use across the entire city, and as you mentioned, the One Seattle plan, a rewriting, revisitation of our comprehensive plan for the entire city. So that plan needs to look at how do our 44 departments and offices of the city collectively collaborate together regarding how we are serving community, but also what are the public-private partnership opportunities for how we meet community and work with community on serving our neighborhoods and growing our neighborhoods and just being in community.
So the comprehensive plan, we're going to totally geek out, but this will be okay. So the comprehensive plan is a document that most Seattleites, they don't have any clue that there is a comp plan. I suppose I could ask, should they? And what is the comp plan, like if we're talking about how to improve Seattle as an equitable place, as a place where people from across the spectrum can live, can build a future, what does the comp plan have to do with that?
So if you think about what government does, right? Transportation, water, electricity, community services, building of public buildings, public-facing structures, all of those things, infrastructure projects, all of those buckets are a part of what the comprehensive plan includes. So if you think about being in a plane at a 50,000 foot level looking down at the city, the comprehensive plan is planning at that higher level, what does the next 20 years of the city look like? How will we grow? How will we evolve? And how will we serve people better? We have a requirement through the Puget Sound Regional Council that we have to do a growth management plan. It's a strategy that we're required as a city of 750,000 people. We need to look at regional growth. We look at how we're going to serve. We assume that over the course of the next 20 years, we will continue to grow, and we may grow as much as having 1 million people here 20 years from now. Where are they going to live? What is their quality of life going to be like? How do we plan for that growth? And how do we make it possible in a way that is meaningful for people and that people want to be here?
And so the comp plan, I should know this, but what is the year target that we're planning for right now? Is it comp plan 2040? It is 2040.
So it's 2024
yeah.
through 2044.
And so all of this in Seattle doesn't happen just by accident? Or does it?
That's an interesting question. So I got into architecture because I believe that we could we could enact social change through built environment work, built environment projects. And I think that at its most basic level, what we do related to land use sets the foundation and the stage for what gets built, right? So we say we can put single family homes over here, you can put apartments over here, you can put like large mixed use buildings over here, and we can do that well. And then the private development community can respond to how we have laid it out, or we can do that poorly in such a way that things get built in places that people don't want to see it or that they don't use it. And so I think that there's a lot of thought and effort and frankly a little bit of experimentation that goes into that every time. We typically, there has been a requirement that we renew that plan every 8 years. That's just changed to every 10 years. But the point being that it's not just a one and done. So there's an opportunity actually annually. We have something called comprehensive plan annual amendments, where every year we can do small adjustments to the plan, and then we do these major adjustments on this larger cycle of 8 to 10 years.
Mm-hmm. All right, you mentioned, I'll take this off ramp for a moment. You mentioned single family zoning.
I did that, didn't I?
You did. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Formerly single family zoning.
Called now?
Neighborhood residential.
Neighborhood residential. And one of the things that's getting a lot of attention is the discussions in Olympia about how to compel some cities to take on, I think, what some people call zoning reform. Yep. But let's go more basic. So in Seattle, there's a fair amount of single-family zoning, right?
80% of our real estate across the city is single-family zones.
I live in a
single-family zones.
Yep. I live in a single-family detached home. A lot of people there's a lot of it around Seattle. Is it as much of a problem as we are talking about in the city in terms of how do we produce, I guess backing up, there's the question of do we have enough housing? Is it in the right places? Is it in the right configurations for the people who need it? Is it at the right affordability levels for the people who are searching it? And Maiko's over there shaking her head at each of those questions. No, Maiko's like, nope,
no,
nope,
no,
nope,
and no.
And no. Is single-family zoning the problem?
I have a response, but I want to let you go first.
Sally, you just went through a whole list of questions, and my head is like whipping around. So I'm going to say that supply and demand, right? Supply has not kept up for the demand for housing. This is not a new problem. I think when I was coming out of graduate school, before many people in this room were born, to be perfectly honest, that's the first time it's like, oh, there's like 15 people bidding on this house in like 1998, which to me means that there is a housing availability problem, right? And it was painful then, and it's only gotten worse now. So we have had a housing, like the amount of housing for the people that are coming here and needing housing, not even if you're coming here, if you're born here, I guess you did come here, there has not been enough housing. Is it affordable? No, it has not been. And the reason why I know that is I used to be the compliance lady for the Seattle Chinatown IDPDA. The person on the fixed income used to be at about 23%, 22% area median income, technical term. And over time, they're now down to like 10 or 11%. Their income is adjusted if you're on fixed income by consumer price index typically. But the job growth here in certain sectors has really taken off. And so this person who's been plugging along, CPI, their rents are not, the amount of income that they have is unable to keep up with that. And so housing is just getting more and more. And so if, I remember at the University of Washington when I took economics, right, the supply and demand curve, if the supply is not keeping up with demand, costs shift. And it is painful. And so I would say single family zoning is potentially a problem if it really is 80% of where it is, because when I think about where the multifamily zones are, they may not always be where I might want to live or close to the amenities that I might want or that I actually might feel like I need in order to sustain the way that I live. And to be perfectly honest, I may want my daughter may not be able to afford to live here. She's 19. But heck knows I don't want her sharing a kitchen with me. Or my brother-in-law, who's 68, I may need to provide care for him, God forbid. But I don't want to live with him because he's kind of that way, right? So, I mean, it's like, how do we allow for this so we can take care of each other and not have to share the same bathroom or kitchen, because it's not going to work.
And there are answers to that question,
Yeah.
which it gets us into an accessory dwelling unit or a detached accessory dwelling unit opportunity for any formerly single-family home site. I think that the big picture analysis would suggest that if we're going to go from 750,000 people to 1 million people over the course of the next 20 years, or frankly, even if that's 850,000 or 900,000, we have built out the landscape within the boundary of what the city of Seattle is, and then we also have like fairly mountainous territory that it becomes a boundary for us. We have water, which is a major boundary for us. So we cannot go out, we can only go up, and up means more density. It also means additional stories depending on what neighborhood we're talking about. I think that looking at the formerly single family zoning piece of the conversation, if where we started was a single family on a lot, now with the opportunity to have a ground floor unit, a basement dwelling, a garage that gets converted into a unit in the backyard. I mean, the reality is that all of our zoning across the city today can accommodate a minimum of 3 families. And I haven't done the exact math, but if every single one of those plots accommodated 3 families today, we would actually be doing a ton to resolve our housing availability issue and also our housing affordability issue. Like Maiko is 100% spot on. We simply don't have enough units to bring the mean average price of a unit down to a level that's affordable for, you know, a family making $125,000 a year, which, you know, area median income for this area. I mean, if you're going to buy a new home, you have to be at 240% of area median income, which is just crazy making. So, you know, we're trying to look at both through subsidized housing and through the creation of additional market rate housing, how do we provide incentive for private development community to develop more units and to have those units be affordable, and they're, you know, whether it's MFTE, market rate tax exemption, multifamily tax exemption.
The developer holds a certain number of the units in the building at, let's call it 80%
80%.
of
It
the
goes
area
down to 40
median
now. That's right.
for rent for a certain number of years. And they get a tax break proportionate to holding that aside. It's a benefit. And then end up, if we've done it right, if we've calibrated it right, the developer ends up with just a little bit of money, extra money in their pocket, because it has to be worth their time.
Well, and we are in the middle of writing legislation right now at OPCD for rezoning of our industrial and maritime lands, which the city's been trying to do for 18 years, and we're finally doing it now. Very exciting, because I'm a geek. But when we do that, one of the opportunities will be for developers to do a certain amount of housing within our industrial lands, where I think it's got around to over 3,000 units.
Yeah.
But
We might do a whole nother show on that. That one's a complicated one.
it is a very complicated one. But the opportunity there, which
Yeah.
is exciting, that's MFTE related, is that if you can do housing if you provide 50% at
Right.
80 to 90% median income.
Yeah. They're only going to set it aside, though, for like 10 years, right? So is that really? But
What? No.
no?
We're
Under
no.
MFTE?
Well, I can't speak about the duration on the MFTE bucket.
So on the single, let's
My
go back to the
fingers,
single
I
family.
hope that it
though.
stays around for a long time.
That is the better benefit for the communities if it's around there for a much longer period of time. So this takes us back, though, to there's some challenges, though, and we end up in these arguments in the city and also in Olympia about the sanctity of the single-family home neighborhoods, and there end up being these arguments about why are you attacking the character, and why are we having to pay for the sins, and why do you hate us?
So,
And-
okay.
And
all right.
where is it?
So I've been doing work in the historic preservation realm for a very long time. So I was on the Historic Seattle Board for 7 years, and then
Pike Market Board?
I was on the Pike Place Market
Yep.
Board for an additional 7 years. And I understand for Seattle, part of the rich fabric of our neighborhoods is the historic character of our neighborhoods, and that has to be maintained. I think that as we talk about whether a family takes the opportunity to do a detached accessory dwelling unit or an attached unit, an ADU or a DADU, it can be done in ways that fit within the fabric of the neighborhood, or it can be done in a way that it does not. And so I think that part of what our job is, and so I think about the community planning work that we do, and the design guidelines that we can help neighborhoods develop, we can help set the rails and the structure so that when a developer comes in to do townhomes or to do stacked flats or to do an ADU or a DADU, that it's done in such a way that it fits and weaves into the existing fabric of a neighborhood and doesn't actually create the problems that some people are concerned about.
I think some of the challenge for both of you is that the question comes up of where does you have limited amounts of time to focus on policy and subsidy and funding, and so what is the city's primary role here? Is the city's primary role to look at this overall supply question? How do you make more housing happen, or is the city's role to figure out, okay, should the people who we're trying to address the most be the ones who can least afford what's happening here in the city? And I imagine there's a tension there, just because there's only so much that you can take on and have a larger swing effect with.
Wow.
And is that?
I feel
I
like
think
your
you're
role
doing-
is very clear.
I think mine is the easy one. Out of the whole range of things that you could do, Sally, there's the land use part, there's the speeding up of the building. That's all like Rico's side for have fun. For my part, it's really looking at just a subsect of that, and what do we do with homeowners to keep them in their units, whether it's a weatherization program? How do we work with Rico's shop on MFTE, or mandatory housing affordability, which is in most other places in the world called inclusionary zoning? And it's really about what are those investments and what is that range. So I actually do not so much get into some of the machinations of you're taking away my single family zoning. Sorry, the neighborhood has, the language has already changed. What I deal with is how dare those people live in my neighborhood, or does it have to be that big, or all that. And what we try to do is, I would say, the need is so great across the lower income spectrums for family sizes or smaller. So when we get down to needing the last 5,000 units, then we can get into what this is. But the need, I think across the Puget Sound region, I think PSRC is saying that we need 810,000 affordable units.
And let's do affordable units. Just for folks who don't track this usually there's a state definition for what constitutes affordability, which is 80% people
Yes.
who can pay rent, who are earning 80% of the area median income. But that's not really even what the city focuses on, because there's still some ability to compete in the marketplace there.
And we do that through the private market oftentimes. So for us, I'd say at the Office of Housing, the big targets are permanent supportive housing.
Permanent supportive housing is usually formerly homeless people who need some services in order to successfully live in that apartment unit that they've
Yes.
been able
So they're
to
formerly
somehow
homeless.
miraculously
Right.
get into.
They are oftentimes have some disability, behavioral health challenges, all that. But if you're starting to break it down just by income, it is challenging. So I'd say 30% and below housing used to be a euphemism for homeless. It's not.
Yeah.
It's really, really not.
Yeah.
30%, if you have a single parent that's making minimum wage with 2 children, that is a 30% of AMI household. Most senior citizens, when they retire from work, they start earning Social Security or supplemental security income, SSI, and then they drop into 30% of AMI, right?
Which I think is shocking for a lot of people to think about. And you started out talking about this. We started talking about like the area median income for this area. And this is part of like what's an equitable city? Like what is an equitable community and how do we move in that direction? And we were talking before this, for folks who might have been listening to the New York Times Daily podcast, they used San Francisco this morning as an example of what happens when you go all in on what is a great idea, be a tech hub, like attract a lot of high wage jobs. And at the same time, you have these growing disparities between who is in these high tech jobs, who can afford to compete out in the marketplace. And then folks who we would not have thought of as poor previously.
Yeah.
Two decades ago, we would not have said that somebody who has retired and is on the fixed income now would be poor. But in this market, holy cow.
In this market, it's really, really hard to survive. So we target on the 30 and below and 50 or 60, and below. And, I'd say up until about 5 or 7 years ago, we were building a lot of single, like studios and ones.
Yeah.
And I think because of the work in Rico's shop especially, we've really tried to get more into family housing because how do we support them? Because they need proximity to schools. They need that stability, right? And so when you're starting to look ahead at what does the impact of not having stable housing do for children, for people's health, for all those things, for what community feels like, because in certain communities, people living in a single unit as a single person is kind of unusual, right? Like the community that I used to work in, sure, you used to have singles, but much more like multi-generational families. And sure, they can all live in a 1-bedroom, but that's really not how they should live.
So, Sally, I know that you're familiar with the Kaiser Family Foundation Social Determinants of Health, and you just said something that brought that to the fore. OPCD, we're trying to look at what's the whole health of community look like. That's education, that's access to healthcare, that's access to housing, that's, where is your job and what kind of job is it that is sustaining. And if we're not looking at all of those things, then the community can't be healthy, the family can't be healthy, the individual can't be healthy. I think an important distinction to make between our jobs, like your job, you are focused, the Office of Housing is focused on subsidized housing. The large majority of that funding is HUD funding, right?
It's actually city funding.
City,
yeah.
through the levy and through.
Through the levy and
through the-
Jumpstart.
Yep.
And
Payroll
some,
expense.
and some HUD funding.
12 million out of 200.
Like 12 million. Yeah.
Okay, all right, fair point, fair
Yeah.
point.
The federal government has pulled totally out of housing.
Yeah.
They don't want to
It
be
is.
landlords. They don't want to do any of this, right? And so
It
they
is.
created other things. So
It is
yeah.
a sad fact.
Yeah.
So subsidized housing, and you have a levy coming up. It's an opportunity for you to advertise.
I can state the levy. I can educate about the
That's
levy.
right.
But yes. Yes.
And then for us, we're trying to look at housing policy across the city, which includes conversation around our MHA, which provides some additional funding for subsidized housing, but then also market rate housing at all levels, from, for sake of the conversation, 50% area median income all the way to these very expensive homes. And I think we have to find a balance where we are embracing all of the communities that make up Seattle proper, but then figure out how do we serve the communities that we just have not been serving well as we have grown over the last 20 years. Not because we did not intend to, but there have been things that we could not foresee, there have been unintended consequences, and we have an opportunity to right some past wrongs that go all the way back to the redlining history of this city. And we have an opportunity to serve BIPOC community and bring a whole group of people into the fold to be a part of the development of the future of Seattle that have been explicitly written out of that opportunity up to this point. And we're talking about generational wealth here, right? We're talking about ownership for families. We're talking about family units that are 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom. We're talking about the ability for me to have my mother like live in a reasonable what would that be? 1,000 square foot unit in the backyard, where she can have her own kitchen and bathroom, but I can still be there for her, right?
I think you're going to be taking Maiko's 68-year-old brother-in-law, but yeah.
He's a little bit of a hoarder, so just heads up. Heads up.
I want to
okay,
let people know we're happy to take questions. And so if you happen to have a question, please raise your hand and Ed will come over to you with the microphone. Yes, excellent, we're ready. And then I'm going to come back and I want to get back into, you mentioned the Kaiser metrics. I'm going to ask you both, what are the metrics we should be using for what an equitable community should look like, and where do we sit on those?
Hello, my name is Edward Newbins. I'm an Ed also. Some of the things I'm from Seattle also, born and raised in Spokane, raised in 22nd Yesler, so I've seen the city change. I went to UW also, so I've seen everything about the city change. And I've heard about, prior to me being here, how my mom used to come here in the Central District, Red Line area, predominantly black area. That's changed obviously, and everybody's been pushed away, all the way far out to, now we're past Tacoma now. So in my community, I consider myself to be a builder of community relations and business and things of that nature. But when I'm hearing opportunities and what you're saying as far as building up the city, I know there's a small group of, say, black entrepreneurs that are also in construction. How the equitable play happening for those folks that typically haven't got access to a lot of the opportunities as far as housing, affordable housing, or any of the build outs? What are you guys doing about that situation? And so people can also participate, not just on the consumer side, but also be part of the building up of the communities. How's that working?
So that's a great question. So I used to spend a lot of time on the construction side of things. And there was a time where I think we did a little bit of a better job of supporting minority-owned businesses and small businesses to be involved in the trades and be part of construction projects. And I think we're trying to get back to that place now. I think to your question, as we are looking at how the city puts out dollars for built works, for built projects, we have the aspirational goals for inclusion, for MWBE firms to be a part of the seeing the value out of construction projects across the city. We can only require it in the public projects that we're a part of, but at the same time, we also can be a part of another conversation, which is about the private side, about why it's good and why it needs to be done, and do some matchmaking. So I think that where we have public-private partnership opportunities and where we have Black entrepreneurs, BIPOC small businesses, where we can make introductions of majority developers with minority, well, in some cases actually minority, like homeowners or businesses, to incorporate them into a large project that's being done. There are ways that we can take 1 + 1 and make 3, and I apologize for the ridiculous euphemism.
Does the Equitable Development Initiative include a component of this? When the city invests through the EDI, are there, I know we're not legally, can we call it targets? What are we allowed to say, and is there a component of that?
Well, so I would say that if you look at our portfolio of EDI Partners, it's all BIPOC-led organizations who, because we all share a set of missions and goals and values together, there's an emphasis that we do place on participation of Black and minority-owned businesses as a part of the projects. And I mean, I think what you see if you look across the diaspora of BIPOC work that we're doing across the city, we all know each other, right? There's a lot of partnerships that pre-existed, people applying for EDI dollars, and there's partnerships that grow over the course of the work that we've been doing. What we are trying to do is lift all boats, and I think there's some commonalities in both experience and need that you will see in the work as it gets done, that we're all just trying to look out for each other and ensure that, like, if EDI partner A gets $1.5 million to put toward their $3 million build out for their community center that they're creating, that we can be a part of them partnering with another BIPOC organization that may be a tenant partner, maybe a construction partner, maybe a programming partner. And so the funny thing that we talk about in the office, every single one of these deals is different. And so it evolves as it will evolve. But yeah, we do try to make it as diverse as we can.
Yep, there we go. Thanks.
So I'm the executive director for the Central Area Collaborative, a community service nonprofit focusing on economic development in the Central area only, all the small businesses. Well, my question I'm going to pose to both of you actually deals with my other hat, Central Area Land Use Review Committee. And the question is, what's the take on development and the reduction of the need for design review boards, especially since the Central area only got theirs in 2018.
Oh my God, I love you so much. I love you so much for bringing up design review boards. You're the best.
So yeah, I just want to get your take on it, because this form is affordability.
Yeah.
Right.
And the developers are using every tool they have to talk, this is the reason.
Yeah.
But the design review board allowed the people to at least come and have some say-so. And now the developers, they're like, we don't need that. And when you look at the permitting process in the city, it's always been long, no matter what the project was.
Right.
The design review might be a little bit, but we're not hearing anything from the city to say, hey, developers, we understand, but it's not all design review. And so all the land use review committees are like, well, where's the city in getting our back? Because this is where the people have their voice.
Great question.
Can I just say design review is not going away?
Well,
is
I mean, so what I've heard is that the city's getting rid of community-based design review, though, that it's gonna morph into administrative only inside the department.
There's a lot of bad rumors
Are there?
out there.
Interesting.
For
All right.
sure.
Good to know.
Yeah. So
I heard it from a pretty reputable source.
well, so to your point, do I think that we're gonna see more administrative design review, which is what you're referring to? Yes,
An
I
administrative
do.
design review, sorry, is inside the department. It's not a community board set of presentations by the developer, so, sorry. Yep.
I think, Dennis, to your point, like, what design review has always provided the opportunity is for the community to have a voice in the design process, and when they see a developer come into their neighborhood to build a thing, an opportunity for folks to say, well, that thing ain't the thing that I would be putting there if I was putting the thing there. And I think that it's extremely important that that remain a part of the process. Having said that, as we had COVID as a health crisis, we do now have housing as a housing crisis, which frankly, in terms of health of community, is also a health crisis. So is there a period of time where I think that we're going to see a relaxing of the regulatory regime related to design review? Yes, I do. And you can hold me accountable for that. But at the same time, through the comprehensive plan work, through the design review projects through the projects that will still go through design review, through our engagement with Office of Housing, you all have a voice. That voice must be heard. We must push on the envelope to ensure that community remains a part of the process at all stages. It has to start at the stage, frankly, of getting to know the people that are decision makers, that establish policies, people that are spending the money to make these projects happen. And that's not always easy because everybody's just trying to take care of their family and themselves. And like, I commend anybody who takes the time to go to a 3-hour design review meeting at the end of the day after they've already been working all week. It's a lot. Having said that, design review is not going away. Yes, I understand why the LURC and a whole bunch of people that are sitting around design review boards are going, what the heck's going on out there right now? We're in a process of figuring out, with the housing crisis, what are the regulations that get eased for some short period of time, and what's that duration, and then what's the impact of that, and what levers are getting pushed and pulled. I can't answer those questions yet because we're not there yet, but I appreciate the concern because it's meaningful.
I have a different response.
Well, I would expect so.
Michael, you go, and then I've got a question here.
Okay.
Yep.
Dennis, I'm not sure the long-term what happens in design review. I'll tell you, I know of a project very close to here that could not build an extra floor or two of housing due to design review, and the design review stretched on for a year. I know of a project in a neighborhood where they were asked to put more red things on it and lanterns to make it look more Asian, because everything that's Asian is red. I know of a project in Ballard that got held up for 4 or 5 years under design review because people didn't want permanent supportive housing there, right? So how do you balance that and that reality with the need for community to be able to voice their concerns? And I'm not necessarily sure it's always around design. Oftentimes it's around use. And how do we, it's kind of like the whole single family zone and people's reaction. Let's make this a historic neighborhood. And it's like, what is it that people are really reacting to? And I've never had a lot of resources, so I didn't always have the attorney to say, if I want this, how do I do this? Because I worked at a very well-hearted but not very resource-rich organization. So sometimes it's like, what are you really trying to get to? And how do we figure out a path to that? What is it in the ideal sense that we should get at? And sometimes that gets lost. Yeah.
Yeah.
Rico speaks so much more eloquently and politely than I do, but yeah.
I think the design review thing is really fascinating though, because I think we can all come up with examples where it has been utilized as a tool to stop a project.
Yes.
And you have developers who have been very adept at using it as a tool to move through a project that maybe was not what it could have been had there been better community engagement, had the community been more supported and how to give feedback. Some of it goes back to, again, though, this question of how much does the community get to determine about a building? Is it about whether there's enough red stuff on it?
Yeah.
Or is it really like bulk and scale, and how did you treat the adjacent park? And my God, what about this wall? Couldn't we? But we get manipulated.
We can also, and Dennis knows this, we can also say how the design review process has actually enhanced projects
Yeah.
for community also.
Yeah, absolutely.
And-
more often than not.
Yes.
All right. Yep.
Hi, my name's Nathan Lutzis. I'm a local planning commissioner, actually. So our city has faced a lot of the same issues that you have when it comes to the comprehensive plan. And my question for you is, what strategies has the city found successful, and what challenges have they faced in getting homeowners to adopt and to put in ADUs, and also to get developers to bite onto using the MFTE and to actually taking that on?
So I'm going to do the ADU question. I'm going to give you the MFTE question.
Will you tell us where you're a planning commissioner?
The city of Kenmore.
City of Kenmore, right on.
Nice.
Okay. A lot of changes happening.
Undergraduate student.
Really interesting. Okay.
That's awesome. So thank you for the ADU question. So our office, Planning and Community Development, we created something called the AD Universe. You can look it up online. What that was we put out an RFP, we had a call for architects to help us out. We created a dozen plans for accessory dwelling units and detached accessory dwelling units.
Kind of an off-the-shelf, choose your model.
That's right.
Choose your
So
adventure.
the IKEA
Yeah.
version
Yeah.
of
Make it easy
building
for people.
a dadu.
Sears.
right?
The Sears catalog.
Yes, that's exactly right.
For those of you who remember Sears.
So if you go online right now, you can go to the AD Universe site and you can see a dozen dadu plans that are pre-approved, they're pre-permitted. Now, what's the honest truth? Doing the site adaptation for any one of those plans still takes a substantial amount of time to get through the regulatory process, but it still helps get you in the door quicker and helps get you started sooner, and also very easily allows someone to go online and identify, if I want to do this kind of thing, who do I need to go to talk to do it?
All right. You get one thing. Was that your one thing?
I'm
'Cause then
almost done.
Are you? Okay.
I'm almost done.
I got another question over here, so I'm
All
just
right, I'm almost
monitoring.
done. What we saw, to answer your question about response by the market, is at the north end, I mean, you can look at the numbers. We doubled the number of ADUs and DADUs that got built. In the south end, in our BIPOC communities of need, we saw no increase in numbers. Why? It goes back to access to capital and access to resources, and frankly, access to time too.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's a problem that we're starting to try to work on now as we do this next comprehensive plan. I'm talking to people at the state about how do we find dollars that are set aside for BIPOC families. Well, I mean, we have to do it by the numbers. So families making less than $125,000 a year or at 80% median income, so that they can do their own ADU or DADU and see generational wealth instead of having to answer yes when the developer comes and says, I want to buy your property. Go.
MFTE, how do we get people to accept MFTE in the development? That hasn't been a problem. Mandatory housing affordability has been more of a concern.
Can I ask a question about the
Yes.
MFTE though?
Yes.
Because the city uniformly uses MFTE as an affordability tool, and some other jurisdictions use it purely as a development prompt tool, where the affordability is not part of the math, really.
And I would argue that 15 to 20 years ago, we used to use it more like the latter. I am sure like 15, 20 years ago, the station across the street, I'm not sure if it would have built if it did not get the MFTE and wasn't able to afford to build there. I do not think Uwajimaya Village
Yeah.
would have been able to afford to
a good
build
example.
with that.
A
But
really good
now I
example.
think throughout most of the city, if you were to ask my staff, they're viewing it purely as an affordability tool, and it has not been a challenge. Now, of course, the development teams are always, they don't like the amount of paperwork needed to have people move in. And what's interesting is it's one way that we can see what units are renting in market rate buildings across the city, because with those buildings, with those units that have MFTE. Were you interested in the MHA?
Yes.
So on the mandatory housing affordability, which is, it's a commitment that you are either going to pay into a fund or you are going to set aside these units for 50 years, affordable at a certain rate.
Self-performance.
Yes, and it's performing that. So either you perform that or you pay into a fund and be done with it. We have not, I believe, former council member Clark, this probably fell within your time. It was supposed to be calibrated to be like 50-50, and most developers have not performed.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go back to the original statement I made about AMIs going up with CPIs, but income. The rent that you serve is developed on this income chart, right? So it does go up a little bit, but if you were to look at what has happened with market rate rents in the jurisdiction, phew, they're kind of on different charts. So I remember somebody asked me once, why would somebody choose to just pay into the fund than to do this? Well, because when you sell the property in 10 to 15 years, it does not have this restriction that people will need to factor in. And over that, I couldn't go back 20 years, over an 18-year time period that I was looking at, rents were only going up within that 18-year time period, which included a recession. Rents were going up, AMI levels were going up 1.8% a year. I can swear to you, market rents in Seattle were going up at higher than that. So developers were making that calculation that they're going to get way more money if they just pay into it out of their capital stack when they're building it. They don't have to worry about operating it. They don't have to worry about that burden. And then they can sell it free
So
without that burden.
I do want to say this about MHA. So what we know is that most developers have been paying into the fund and not self-performing, i.e. creating affordable units on their property,
For 50 years.
on their project
Yeah.
site. We are trying to do a readjustment so that we get more developers to self-perform on site. Here's the reality. The more we can get to self-performance on site, you're going to, and you do a couple things. If you're building, and I don't want to get into the numbers of cost per square foot, but if you're building a fancy building and you self-perform units as a part of that fancy building, the chances are the quality of those units is going to follow the same or similar quality of build as the rest of the building. That is an added bonus. In addition, if you're paying into a fund, the not-for-profit developers that have to find sites and have to wait in line to build their projects, the number of places that they can go to find a property that they can afford to then build on is small. The larger developers that have access to other properties or have been holding a property and waiting to build on it, if there's self-performance that happens there, then there's also equity in the sense that we aren't putting rich people over here and people that are in subsidized housing over here. We're creating more integrated communities. I have more that I can talk about there,
Oh my God, I know.
but look at me stopping.
Last question.
Hi, my name is Mia. I'm a student assistant here at the UW Commons. And earlier, you guys were talking about multi-family housing, and I feel like I was hearing kind of like two, maybe like opposing or like differing like ideas there, where it was like, people who experience like severe housing instability and there isn't like affordable housing for them. And typically those people tend to be BIPOC. And they're like, I guess like forcibly crammed into multi-generational housing, and you said that it was implied that like the quality of life like for those people like isn't the best. But then I was also hearing like, oh, in order to accommodate for the population growth that Seattle will be experiencing, it's better to, or it's good to try and promote multi-family housing. And so I was wondering, like, if multifamily housing is going to be promoted, who is being targeted in that, and how would that necessarily work?
So I would say for multifamily housing, the stuff that the market generally provides, studios and ones, potentially twos, 2 bedrooms. The families that we sometimes see needing housing, I would say the most successful building that the Seattle Chinatown International District Preservation and Development Authority owns and operates is a building that's all 2 and 3 bedrooms. It's above a library and a community center. The rents are set at 30% and 50% of area median income. That building has people who moved into that building, 20 to 25% of that building, the people moved in 17 years ago and they do not move. Yeah. So how do you plan for the different size units and all that we need? Really? I call Rico and his department who holds that housing data. Now, of course, we can get a general sense of that. And as I said, we're not down to our last 5,000 units. So we have to be like, okay, this is it. But we do need to acknowledge that families want to live here. And it took my department a really long time to acknowledge that families want to live here. And I think that is painful.
And also, but also to acknowledge it, recognizing like if we want to actually see family-sized units, we're going to have to pay more for those.
And we're going to have to build it, right?
We have to
so
build it.
Our metrics,
Right.
Sally, I think you were talking about what are the metrics of success? My department uses a metric of success as the cost per unit. And and the number of units we produce. And I'm going to say that that is not the right measure, because then that incents small studios.
Yeah. Right.
Because then the cost for that unit is low, and lo and behold, I created a unit when we realize that of course it's going to cost more to build a 4-bedroom unit than a studio. Right. I'm going to need 2 bathrooms and this much more floor size. The land is being used a little bit less efficiently, but isn't that okay? Yeah. So I think that is one of the challenges that we have. Granted, I do understand, I think in 2010, Seattle had the most single occupancy. Seattle's a single occupancy city because we have a lot of single people living here. Yeah. But I swear, Chris and Joseph, they're single guys. They choose to live together. Ooh, maybe they want a 2-bedroom, maybe not. It's hard. We can plan looking at data, but you have to be flexible in what you provide.
Wow. And that was the end of our hour.
Oh!
I was just going to say.
Listen to him.
Like,
it doesn't matter what I say, really.
You knew this.
I knew this going in.
I only wanted to comment on the who are we targeting, and I think the reality is that we can't target any one part of the market specifically. We have to look at the entire diaspora of everyone from 0 to 30% area median income, all the way up to the folks that are at 240% area median income, because we have a whole cadre of people that want to live and work and play here.
And that's what I love about having both of you as guests tonight, because Rico, you're right. Like the city is like, how do we become a better Seattle? How do we become the place where more people can land here and make a life for themselves? And Maiko, your team is also looking and saying, okay, but who struggles the most to actually make that happen? And what is local government's responsibility? And how do we become the place that can really make that happen for the folks who are the furthest from the opportunity and furthest from being able to seize that on their own? So I'm incredibly grateful that you both said yes to this. And we touched on so many different things that we could go much deeper on. Ed, are you going to close us out by talking about who is joining us in March and April?
Yes, and before we do that, we're going to give a round of applause to Rico, Maiko, and former councilperson, this is the first time I've heard this, former councilperson Clark. Let's give a round of applause for that really powerful, thoughtful, deep, and friendly conversation between the three of you. A round of applause.